blinked 3:03 a.m. Outside was a hushed landscape of shadowed buildings and empty streets. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous tune, a stark contrast to the chaotic energy of the dinner rush hours ago. Leaning back in the worn chair, the remnants of a cold slice of pizza, a leaden weight in my stomach, the unsettling encounter with a long-haired woman from the previous night still clung like a persistent nightmare. Tried to rationalize it. A vivid hallucination brought on by exhaustion, a bizarre prank. But the single, impossibly thick strand of black hair found on the counter was undeniable. Locked it in a plastic bag, a tangible piece of a reality desperately wanted to dismiss. Tonight, the silence felt heavier, the shadows deeper. Every creak of the old building, every gust of wind rattling the delivery door, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. Kept glancing at the security monitors, the grainy images of the empty dining area offering little comfort. Around 3:45 a.m., the power flickered, plunging the restaurant into momentary darkness. Breath hitched. When the lights sputtered back on, casting distorted shadows, Swore saw a fleeting movement in the corner of the dining area, a dark shape that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Gripped the walkie-talkie, finger hovering over the call button for Mr. Hambry, but hesitated. Couldn't explain a shadow. He'd think I was losing it. Time crawled. Busied myself with cleaning tasks, scrubbing surfaces that were already spotless, anything to keep my mind occupied. The smell of cleaning fluid was a weak shield against the lingering scent of decay couldn't shake. Just after 4:30 a.m., the front door, which had meticulously locked and bolted, creaked open a fraction of an inch. A sliver of the pre-dawn gloom seeped into the brightly lit interior. Blood ran cold. Hadn't heard the bell. Hadn't heard anything. Crept towards the counter. Heart hammering against ribs. Peeking around the edge, saw nothing. The door remained slightly ajar, swaying almost imperceptibly in a non-existent breeze. Reached out to close it. Hand trembling, as fingers touched the cold metal of the handle, felt a faint vibration. A low, resonant hum seemed to emanate from the door itself. Snatched hand back as if burned. Suddenly, the radio in pocket crackled to life. It was the dispatcher. Voice usually cheerful, now laced with static and an odd urgency. Report of unusual activity. Vicinity of Pizza Hut. Officers en route. Stay inside. The transmission broke up, leaving with a chilling premonition. Backed away from the door, eyes scanning the darkened corners of the restaurant. The humming intensified, and the air grew heavy, thick with that cloying sweet smell again. Then, saw it. A dark, viscous fluid was seeping from under the backroom door, spreading across the linoleum like a creeping shadow. It wasn't just dark. It seemed to absorb the light, leaving a trail of matte blackness. Panic seized. Fumbled for phone, fingers slipping on the smooth surface. As finally unlocked it, the screen went blank. No signal. The humming reached a fever pitch, and the backroom door began to rattle violently. Splintering wood echoed through the empty space, scrambled onto a table, eyes wide with terror, watching as the door hinges tore away, one by one. The door crashed inward, revealing not the familiar storage room, but a swirling vortex of shadow. Tendrils of blackness snaked out, reaching, grasping. And in the heart of the darkness, two glowing red eyes materialized, burning with malevolent intent. A voice, ancient and guttural, echoed from the void. You cannot escape what hungers. Then, the long hair appeared. It snaked out from the darkness, thicker and longer than remembered, each strand moving with an unnerving sentience. They lashed out, wrapping around tables, chairs, pulling them into the swirling abyss. Screamed, scrambling further back on the table as the hair whipped around, narrowly missing limbs. The sweet, decaying scent was overpowering now, making gag. One strand, thicker than arm, shot towards. Instinctively raised arms to block it, but it passed through flesh as if made of smoke, leaving a trail of icy coldness. The red eyes drew closer, and could see the monstrous shape behind them. A vaguely humanoid figure wreathed in shadow, its form shifting and indistinct. The hair tightened around the table legs, splintering the wood. Knew it was only a matter of seconds. Suddenly, the front window shattered inwards, showering the room with glass. A figure stood silhouetted against the pre-dawn light, holding what looked like a medieval halberd. It was Mr. Hambry, face grim. "Get away from her!" he roared, charging towards the swirling darkness. Mr. Hambry swung the halberd, the silver blade flashing. It connected with one of the larger strands of hair, and it shrieked, recoiling into the darkness. "What is happening?" cried, voice hoarse with fear. "She feeds on fear, on despair," Mr. Hambry yelled back, parrying another lash of hair. "The Thorn Entity! It's been drawn here before. We thought it was gone." He fought with a ferocity never knew he possessed, but the sheer number of hair-like tendrils was overwhelming. They wrapped around his weapon, his arms, his legs. "The hair!" he gasped. "It's constricting." Watched in horror as the black tendrils tightened around Mr. Hambry, his face contorting in pain. He dropped the halberd, his struggles becoming weaker. Desperation surged through. Had to do something. Remembered the plastic bag containing the single strand of hair from the previous night, still tucked in locker, ignoring the creature's glowing red eyes fixed on. Leaped off the table and sprinted towards the break room. The hair lashed out, tearing through the air where had been moments before. Fumbled with the locker key, hands shaking so violently could barely insert it into the lock. Finally, it clicked open. Grabbed the plastic bag, the single strand of black hair feeling strangely cold in hand. As turned back, the scene in the dining area was even more gruesome. Mr. Hambry was suspended in the air, completely encased in the black hair, his muffled screams fading. The Thorn Entity was slowly pulling him towards the swirling darkness. Had a crazy idea, a desperate gamble. Remembered something about sympathetic magic, about how a part could represent the whole. With a trembling hand, held out the single strand of hair. "Leave him alone," yelled, voice shaking but firm. "Take this instead." The Thorn Entity paused, its red eyes focusing on the strand in hand. The swirling darkness seemed to ripple, and the humming intensified. Slowly, hesitantly, a tendril of black hair detached from Mr. Hambry and reached towards the single strand held. It touched the hair, and a high-pitched shriek echoed through the restaurant, a sound that seemed to vibrate in very bones. The single strand in hand began to writhe and smoke, turning to ash and grasp. At the same time, the black hair encasing Mr. Hambry recoiled, and the swirling darkness in the back room began to shrink, the red eyes dimming. Mr. Hambry fell to the floor with a sickening thud, unconscious, but alive. The Thorn Entity let out a final, mournful wail, and the remaining tendrils of hair retreated into the shrinking void, which then snapped shut with a sound like tearing fabric. Silence descended upon the Pizza Hut, broken only by ragged breathing and the soft groan of Mr. Hambry. The sweet, decaying smell was gone, replaced by the metallic tang of blood and the acrid scent of burnt hair. The shattered windows let in the first pale light of dawn, illuminating the scene of carnage and the impossible. Had faced a nightmare, and somehow had survived, but the memory of the long black hair and the glowing red eyes would forever haunt the long night shifts to come, and knew, deep down, that whatever the Thorn Entity was, it wasn't truly gone. It was merely waiting in the shadows for the next moment of fear, the next wave of despair, to draw it back to the lonely Pizza Hut on the outskirts of town. The old Victorian house loomed on the hill overlooking the town, its silhouette a jagged tear against the bruised twilight sky. Rain lashed against the warped window panes, each gust of wind sounding like a mournful sigh trapped within the aged timbers. My husband, Mark, squeezed my hand, his knuckles white. Our daughters, 16-year-old Emily and 8-year-old Lily, clung to us, their faces pale in the dim light filtering through the dusty curtains. This was supposed to be a fresh start, a bigger house for our growing family, but an icy tendril of unease had wrapped around my heart the moment we crossed the threshold. "It's just old," Mark said, his voice a little too loud, a forced cheerfulness that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It feels wrong," I murmured, my gaze sweeping over the shadowed corners of the living room. Lily shivered, burying her face in my side. Days blurred into a week, each one deepening the sense of wrongness. Unpacking felt like a futile act against the house's silent resistance. The air was always cold, clinging to us like a damp shroud, and a cloying, sweet scent, like overripe lilies mixed with something metallic, permeated every room. Lily's usual bright chatter had dwindled to hushed whispers, and her eyes, once full of innocent curiosity, now held a flicker of something akin to fear. Emily, always the more pragmatic one, tried to maintain a brave face, but the nightly scratching from the attic was clearly getting to her. She'd started having trouble sleeping, complaining of vivid nightmares filled with shadowy figures and whispers, just beyond the edge of hearing. Then came Silas, Lily's imaginary friend. At first, it was the typical childhood fantasy. But Silas's pronouncements grew increasingly disturbing. He lived in the walls, Lily said. And he knew things. Dark things. Things that made my blood run cold whenever Lily repeated them in her small, serious voice. One evening, Mark went down to the basement to check the ancient furnace. The lights flickered and died, plunging him into absolute darkness. I heard his muffled shout, a sound laced with a primal terror I'd never heard before. He came stumbling back upstairs, his face ashen, unable to articulate what had frightened him, only pointing with a trembling hand towards the dark abyss below. The next day, Emily discovered an old, leather-bound book in the attic, hidden beneath a loose floorboard. Its pages were filled with unsettling drawings of twisted figures and strange symbols, alongside handwritten passages in a spidery script. As she deciphered the words, a wave of icy cold washed over the attic, and the scratching from within the walls intensified, sounding almost frantic. That night, I found Lily standing in the hallway outside her room, her eyes wide and unfocused. "Silas wants to show us something," she whispered, her voice flat and toneless. She led me and Mark to the living room, where the air had grown heavy, the sweet, metallic scent almost suffocating. The shadows in the corners seemed to writhe and lengthen. Suddenly, the old grandfather clock in the hallway began to chime, its deep, resonant tones echoing through the silent house. But it wasn't just chiming the hour. It chimed 13 times. Panic clawed at my throat. 13. An omen. The scratching in the walls grew louder, more insistent, and then a new sound joined it. A low, guttural humming that vibrated through the floorboards and into our bones. The temperature plummeted, and I could see my breath misting in the air. Emily stumbled down the stairs, her face pale and drawn. "The book, it's talking to me," she whispered, clutching the leather-bound volume to her chest. "It says this house. It's alive." Then, the walls began to move, not literally, but the shadows within them shifted and coalesced, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to leer at us from the periphery of our vision. Lily giggled, a high-pitched, unsettling sound that didn't belong to my sweet daughter. "Silas is happy," she said, her eyes now glowing with a faint, unnatural light. The humming intensified, and the air grew thick and viscous, as if we were wading through treacle. The sweet, metallic scent became overpowering, making me gag. I felt a cold touch on my arm, and I whirled around, but there was nothing there. Mark grabbed my hand, his grip tight. "We need to get out of here," he said, his voice hoarse with fear. But the doors were jammed, the windows sealed shut as if by an unseen force. We were trapped. The scratching and humming reached a crescendo, and the shadows in the walls began to solidify, taking on more distinct, monstrous forms. Lily began to chant in a language I didn't understand, her voice distorted and ancient. Emily cried out, dropping the book. A spectral figure, gaunt and decaying, materialized before her, its hollow eyes burning with malevolent intent. It reached out a skeletal hand, and Emily's eyes glazed over, her body going limp. "No!" I screamed, lunging towards her. But an invisible barrier slammed me back. The house seemed to revel in our terror. The walls pulsed, the floorboards vibrated, and the air crackled with an unseen energy. The monstrous shadows lunged, their claws tearing at the air. Mark fought back with a desperate courage, grabbing a heavy lamp and swinging it at the encroaching darkness. But the shadows were everywhere, overwhelming us. Lily continued her chanting, her voice growing stronger, more resonant. The spectral figure merged with Emily, their forms twisting together into something grotesque and unholy. The last thing I saw was Mark's face, contorted in a silent scream, as the shadows enveloped him. Then, the coldness consumed me, and the sweet metallic scent filled my senses, and the darkness closed in. The old Victorian house stood on the hill, silent once more. The rain had stopped, and the first rays of dawn painted the sky with hues of pale pink and gray. Inside, the Miller family was gone, their screams absorbed by the ancient wood and the hungry shadows. Only Lily remained, standing by the window, her eyes vacant, a faint, chilling smile playing on her lips as she whispered to her silent companion in the walls. "They're ours now, Silas." The antique pendulum clock on the mantelpiece ticked with agonizing slowness, each swing amplifying the oppressive silence that had settled over our old house. Outside, the Islamabad night pressed against the windows, a velvet darkness punctuated by the distant hum of traffic, a world away from the unsettling stillness within these aged walls. Ben was away at a conference in Karachi, and our daughters, Maya and Elara, were sound asleep in their rooms upstairs, their innocent slumber a fragile shield against the growing dread that had been my unwelcome companion since dusk fell. The house, with its rambling layout and creaking timbers, usually held a comforting familiarity. Tonight, however, every shadow seemed deeper, every creak more deliberate, as if the very structure was alive and watching. A subtle shift had occurred as the last rays of sunlight faded, a palpable change in the atmosphere, a feeling of being observed by unseen eyes. I'd tried to distract myself, moving from room to room, tidying aimlessly, but the feeling of being utterly alone, truly vulnerable within these echoing spaces, clung to me like a second skin. The scent of sandalwood from Ben's study, usually a comforting aroma, now seemed faint, almost drowned out by a new, underlying sweetness. The cloying jasmine, stronger tonight than ever before, a phantom perfume in the still air. The first truly disturbing event occurred just after 11 p.m. I was in the kitchen, making a cup of herbal tea, when the radio on the counter, which had been silent, suddenly crackled to life. A low, distorted whisper filled the room, a sibilant rush of sound that sent a jolt of pure unease through me. I fumbled for the off switch, my hand trembling, but the whispering persisted for a few more agonizing seconds before fading back into silence. The station display remained blank, my heart hammered against my ribs. I told myself it was a fluke, a random signal interference. But the air in the kitchen had grown noticeably colder, and the sweet jasmine scent was stronger here, almost sickeningly so. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked outside Maya's room. I froze, every muscle tense. Maya was a restless sleeper, but this sounded heavier, more deliberate than her usual nighttime stirrings. I held my breath, listening intently, but the silence returned, thick and expectant. The suspense coiled tighter within me. I crept to the bottom of the stairs, my bare feet silent on the aged wood. The hallway upstairs was shrouded in shadow, the moonlight filtering through the landing window, casting long, distorted shapes. I strained my ears, but heard nothing. Returning to the living room, I tried to rationalize my growing fear. The house was old. It made noises. My imagination was running wild in Ben's absence. But the logical explanations felt hollow, inadequate against the palpable sense of something unseen drawing closer. The grandfather clock in the hall chimed the half-hour, its deep tones resonating through the silent house. As the last chime faded, the whispering began again, this time clearer, more distinct. It seemed to be coming from the walls themselves, a chorus of hushed voices just beyond the plaster, their words indistinguishable but their intent undeniably unsettling. The temperature in the living room continued to drop. I wrapped myself tightly in a blanket, but the chill seemed to emanate from the very air, seeping into my bones. The shadows in the corners deepened, and the subtle movements I'd noticed earlier became more pronounced, a flicker at the edge of my vision, a momentary distortion in the moonlight. Then, the thumping started, a low, rhythmic beat, like a slow, deliberate heartbeat, coming from the basement. It was faint at first, but it grew steadily louder, resonating through the floorboards, a steady pulse of dread beneath the whispers. Upstairs, Elara started to cry out in her sleep, a soft, whimpering sound that tugged at my heart. I started towards the stairs, my concern for her momentarily eclipsing my own growing fear. As I reached the landing, I saw it, a shadow moving at the end of the hallway, near Maya's room. It was tall and gaunt, its form indistinct, yet radiating an intense cold. 2 crimson pinpricks of light flickered within its darkness, burning with an ancient, malevolent intensity. Terror, raw and primal, seized me. I stumbled backward, my breath catching in my throat. The whispering intensified, seeming to swirl around me, and the thumping from the basement grew louder, more frantic. Elara's cries became more distressed. I had to reach her, protect her. Ignoring the paralyzing fear, I forced myself to move towards the hallway. As I approached Maya's room, the door creaked open a fraction of an inch. A sliver of deeper darkness emanated from within, and the sweet jasmine scent was overpowering here, almost suffocating. The whispering was loudest near this door, and I could almost make out words now, hushed and chilling. Anya wants to play with you. My blood ran cold. Anya, Elara's imaginary friend. Suddenly, a small, pale hand reached out from the sliver of darkness in Maya's doorway. Its touch was like ice, sending a jolt of pure terror through me. I recoiled, a strangled scream escaping my lips. The crimson lights at the end of the hallway began to move closer, and the thumping from the basement reached a frantic, uneven rhythm. The whispering surrounded me, a chorus of ghostly children beckoning me into the darkness. I backed away, my eyes darting between the hand reaching from Maya's room and the approaching shadow in the hallway. The air grew heavy, pressing down on me, stealing my breath. Then, I saw it in the large mirror at the end of the hallway, a reflection that wasn't mine. Standing behind me was a figure tall and gaunt, its face pale and gaunt with hollow, accusing eyes. Long, tangled black hair framed its spectral face, and its crimson eyes burned into mine. A voice, cold and ancient, whispered in my ear, so close it felt like a breath of icy air. "You're all alone now." And they're waiting. The thumping reached a frenzied crescendo, the whispering became a deafening chorus, and the shadows lunged. The last thing I felt was a bone-chilling cold, and the sensation of being pulled into an endless, suffocating darkness. The sweet scent of jasmine, the final, horrifying perfume of my solitude, as the innocent cries of my daughter echoed in the encroaching void. The pendulum clock downstairs continued its steady, relentless tick, marking the passage of a night that would never end for me, and perhaps had only just begun for my sleeping children. The moon, a skeletal fingernail in the inky sky, cast long, distorted shadows across the overgrown lawn of Blackwood Manor. My husband, Ben, gripped my hand tightly as we led our daughters, 10-year-old Maya and 6-year-old Ilara, up the creaking porch steps. The air hung heavy with the scent of jasmine, strangely sweet and unsettling against the backdrop of the decaying grandeur of our new home. Suspense coiled in my stomach like a cold serpent. This place, despite its beauty, whispered of forgotten sorrows. "It's magnificent, isn't it?" Ben said, his voice a little too enthusiastic, a thin veil over the apprehension I knew he felt. Maya, usually a whirlwind of energy, clung to my leg, her bright eyes wide with a hesitant wonder. Ilara, ever the bolder one, skipped ahead, her small hand trailing along the weathered stone railing, oblivious to the stories the house seemed to hold within its crumbling facade. The interior was a labyrinth of shadows and dust motes, dancing in the slivers of moonlight filtering through stained glass windows. A profound silence reigned, broken only by the rhythmic tick of an ancient grandfather clock in the hall. Each tick, an echoing heartbeat in the stillness. The air was heavy, carrying a faint, musty odor mingled with that cloying sweetness from outside. Days unfolded with an increasing sense of unease. The beauty of the manor, the intricate carvings, the sweeping staircase, the vast, echoing rooms, was tainted by an undercurrent of something unseen, unheard, yet palpably present. Doors creaked open on their own, whispers seemed to drift from empty rooms, and the temperature would inexplicably plummet in certain areas, leaving a trail of goosebumps in its wake. Maya started seeing things, fleeting shadows in her peripheral vision, a glimpse of a figure standing at the end of the hallway that vanished as quickly as it appeared. Ilara, meanwhile, developed an imaginary friend named Anya, a little girl who, she claimed, lived behind the mirrors. Anya told Ilara secrets, hushed and cryptic, that sent shivers down my spine. The suspense tightened its grip one stormy evening. The power flickered and died, plunging the manor into an inky blackness punctuated only by the flashes of lightning illuminating the rain-streaked windows. A low, rhythmic thumping began somewhere deep within the walls, growing louder with each clap of thunder, like a frantic heartbeat trapped within the house's very structure. Ben ventured into the cavernous basement, armed with a flashlight, to check the generator. The thumping intensified down there, accompanied by a dragging sound, as if something heavy was being pulled across the stone floor. His calls for me were strained, tinged with a fear I rarely heard. He returned minutes later, his face pale and slick with sweat, unable to articulate what he'd encountered, only pointing a trembling finger towards the darkness he'd just fled. The suspense became unbearable. I started researching the history of Blackwood Manor, spending hours in the local library, poring over dusty archives. The stories I unearthed were fragmented and disturbing. Tales of a family consumed by tragedy, whispers of dark rituals, and an ancient entity tied to the land, a malevolent presence that demanded a terrible price. One afternoon, Maya found a hidden room behind a loose panel in the library. Inside, a collection of antique dolls lay scattered on the floor, their porcelain faces cracked, and their glass eyes staring blankly ahead. One doll, larger than the others, had long, tangled black hair and a single crimson stain on its white dress. As Maya touched it, a wave of icy cold washed over the room, and the thumping within the walls resonated with a new urgency. That night, Ilara woke us with a blood-curdling scream. She sat bolt upright in bed, her eyes wide with terror, pointing towards the large, ornate mirror in her room. "Anya. Anya is crying," she sobbed. The mirror's surface seemed to ripple, and for a fleeting moment, I thought I saw a distorted face reflected within it, a face that wasn't Ilara's. The suspense reached its breaking point during a particularly violent thunderstorm. The house groaned and shuddered under the onslaught of wind and rain. The thumping within the walls had become a frantic pounding, and the dragging sound was now accompanied by a low, guttural moaning. Ben and I huddled with the girls in the living room, the flickering candlelight casting grotesque shadows that danced with the storm outside. Suddenly, the grandfather clock in the hall began to chime, its deep, resonant tones tolling an uneven, unsettling rhythm. It chimed 7 times, then paused, then chimed 3 more, a discordant symphony of dread. Then, the walls began to bleed, not literally, but dark, viscous stains seeped from the plaster, spreading like weeping wounds. The sweet scent intensified, now laced with a metallic tang that made my stomach churn. Maya screamed, pointing towards the far corner of the room. A figure began to coalesce in the shadows, tall and gaunt, its form indistinct but radiating an intense cold. 2 crimson eyes opened within the darkness, burning with ancient malice. Ilara, her eyes wide and unfocused, began to speak in a voice that was not her own, a high-pitched, childlike whisper that held an unnerving authority. "Anya says you've been here too long. Anya wants you to leave." The suspense snapped. Terror, raw and primal, seized us. Ben grabbed my hand, and we tried to pull the girls towards the front door, but it was jammed shut, the heavy oak unyielding. The windows, too, were sealed, as if the house itself was trapping us. The crimson eyes in the corner drew closer, and the thumping within the walls reached a frantic crescendo. The shadows writhed and elongated, taking on monstrous shapes. The air grew heavy, pressing down on us, stealing our breath. Ilara, still speaking in Anya's voice, pointed towards the large mirror in the hallway. Its surface shimmered, and the distorted face I'd glimpsed before became clearer. A pale, gaunt visage with long, tangled black hair and hollow, accusing eyes. The figure in the corner lunged, its touch like ice. Ben shoved me and the girls behind him, his face a mask of desperate courage. But the darkness was overwhelming, seeping into every corner of the room. The last thing I saw clearly was the mirror in the hallway, its surface now a swirling vortex of shadow. Ilara, her eyes glowing with the same crimson light as the figure in the corner, reached out a small hand towards it. "Come play with us," she whispered, and the world dissolved into a chilling, absolute darkness. Blackwood Manor stands silhouetted against the moonlit sky, its beauty undisturbed. The scent of jasmine still hangs heavy in the air, now mingled with a faint metallic sweetness that lingers like a forgotten memory. Inside, the silence is profound, broken only by the gentle tick of the grandfather clock in the hall, its rhythm steady, unchanging. And behind the mirrors and within the walls, Anya and her new friends wait, their crimson eyes gleaming in the darkness, for the next unsuspecting souls to cross their threshold, ready to add them to their eternal, beautiful horror story.